Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Just wanted to wait for a couple of people here, so I know we're a minute or so past the hour, but thank you for joining us here on our webinar for creating a succession plan for financial advisors. Looks like we have a question right off the bat, so maybe we could I could certainly we could yeah. Let's Mark. What do you got for us today, Mark? How are you, sir? Nope. Okay. Well, if Mark, if you, so I was gonna, if give me a minute here, we'll get to some questions, and you could certainly answer. You could speak your questions and raise your hand, or you can put it into the chat feature. So we'll be happy to answer questions live as we go through it, and go from there. If there's anything, if you can't raise your actually speak into the webinar, you can just use the chat feature. It's easily. But my name is Joe Nupieri. I'm joined here with Scott Brittman,
Hello, everyone.
who's we're the founders of Compass Acquisitions, and really just wanted to take some time here today and discuss some different items on succession planning. I think it's an important topic for financial advisors that I think everybody seems to be concerned about, whether it's setting up succession or having something in place or valuation. So we're going to try to cover a lot of those topics here today, and I encourage you to be as hands-on or certainly interactive as possible. So I think we like to, instead of having us just sit here and talk, I like to sort of have these as more of a roundtable discussion, if you will. And I think it drives the content in different directions that I think is helpful. So just want to cover some of the topics that we're going to go through here today. The first one, just starting with evaluating some of your succession options. Financial advisors have many options they could consider when starting to evaluate their succession plan. So we'll go through some of those. Finding the right successor, I think, is always really important. Finding the right fit, and some of the things to look for, and how do you go about finding the right successor, I think is certainly a very important topic. So we'll cover that a little bit. Structuring the deal, really just going different ways to structure the deals, down payments, how they're financed. We're going to go into all of that, and then business valuation. One of certainly an important topic. I think that people always just want to know what their business is valued, and you hear so many different multiples out there, and just different ways of how to maximize what buyers are looking for out there. So we'll cover that a little bit, and then what items will affect positively or negatively those valuations, and then finally finish off with just some different timeline options, depending on if you're looking for a straight outright sale, or you're looking for a sell and stay, or more of a merger, or anything in between. So we'll kind of cover that a little bit as well. With that being said, we'll kind of dive right into the material here. So let's start, and I just want to make sure we didn't have any. Did we? Okay, no questions. All right, cool. So evaluating succession options. I think here are the some of the main ways that we identify. People will come to us, advisors, to try to tell us or ask us what type of succession options they have. And you know I think one of the first things we hear from people is, hey, can I bring in a junior, somebody internally that already works with the firm? And that's a very good way of doing it. I think you have to just identify the right person. You have to feel comfortable with that person, usually a younger individual that is just open to really being molded by you. And I think that's always going to be an easy way, where the clients already know that person. But that's not always the case for many advisors. I think that has we've seen that work. We've also seen it not work. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk below a little bit more about bringing in a junior advisor. I think it's really there's such a high dropout rate in younger advisors in this business that you don't know. It's never a certainty. So you could groom somebody for several years, ultimately to find out that they're not going to work out for you, or they're not interested, and end up leaving, and then kind of put you into that same ballpark. But if you have a good relationship, I think that is a really good way to go, and you trust that person, you've known them for a while, and they'll ultimately take over your business. I think that's a great way to do it. Another one is to explore more external options, like mergers, sell and stays, or full partial acquisitions. I think, talking to more well-established firms, locally, geographically, that would align with you, your clients, how you do business, and finding that right fit, which we'll talk about in a later slide. But that's one option that people will consider as well, because you could take a lot off your plate that way. So sell and stays are becoming more and more popular, where you sell, you can monetize your practice, and you could stick around for a period of 5 years, 6 years, however long, as an independent contractor, or a salaried employee, if that's what you wanted to do. But what it does is it takes a lot off your plate. It allows you to essentially solidify a succession plan, and have somebody in place to take over your business when you really want to ultimately leave, and then you could monetize it along the way. But also, a lot of times people will help to grow that business as they're working it, so that just increases their valuation, almost like a an earnout, right? And we'll talk about that when we go into structures a little bit more. I see we have a question here, on compensation. If we sell and stay, aside from the deal money, how is compensation structured? Owner and employee income. I think compensation could be structured a number of different ways on a sell and stay. I've seen it where you put a value to the business, right? And then they give you some sort of upfront money, with the remainder paid out over a 5-year period. And then if you're sticking around to work, you might get you can get paid every time you sit in on a meeting, on a per diem basis. You can get paid on weekly or monthly. You could be put on a salary, and that's all negotiable, whether it's 100,000, 200,000, whatever. I've seen different, depending on what the book is producing, and what that looks like. So there are a lot of different compensation options for the sell and stay. It just has to make sense for you, to do it, as well as making sense for the buyer to be able to do that as well. But the good thing about the sell and stay, and thanks for the question, is it really allows you to take a back seat a little bit, and not be the sole proprietor, and deal with all of the administrative compliance and all of the day-to-day that goes along with being a financial advisor, in a sense. So you can take a little bit off your plate in the remaining 5 years of your career or more, however, whatever your timeline is, and then also be able to monetize the business along the way. And then you're able to essentially double monetize, if you wish, because you can get that upfront money, and then you continue to get paid out. And then if you're getting paid, if you're bringing in new assets, some people, I'll give you an example, like some guy we just worked with. He only wanted to meet with clients. That was the best part of his job. He didn't want to deal with anything else. So he did that, teamed up with another group, did sort of a sell and stay. And then he plans on, just over the next 3 to 5 years, really just meeting with clients, going out to lunch with them, and being able to bring on new assets too, where as a sole proprietor, it was a little bit more difficult for him to bring on new assets and grow. So that's just one of the things. And then going into grooming or mentoring new talent, bringing in a junior advisor. I hear that a lot, where that's really a popular way for advisors to initially start thinking about it, but there are some potential drawbacks to that. Um, And so there are potential drawbacks to the junior, and I'll kind of go into that briefly. So, but if it works out well, that's great. And if it doesn't, the drawbacks mainly that we've seen are finding a junior advisor can be a little bit more challenging. And I know I talked a little bit about that already, but I just want to go into it a little bit more because I think, it really could be a good way of doing it. So it's different from it's different from that top slide where we identify internal successors. That's somebody who actually works in your firm already, and you just take them and they end up taking over your business. Bringing on new talent or bringing in a junior is bringing on somebody from the outside and somebody who has no idea about your business, and you don't really have any idea about them, but maybe they're a younger, smaller advisor. And then again, like I had mentioned earlier, it can be challenging because also the other thing to consider is now in the last 5 years of your career or 10, now you're training somebody. So there's a lot of work involved with that. And if it, like I mentioned earlier, if it doesn't work out, now you're back to square one. So just some different options to consider, I think, and really just assessing the financial and operational feasibility of each one and determining, I think, which one is best. Moving on to the next slide here, I'll let Scott kind of go into this a little.
Yeah, I mean, finding the right successor, I always recommend kind of putting a list together of what are your, make or break situations that you're walking into, or making a list of your deal breakers. What are your must-haves? Do you want to stay within the same BD or clearing firm? Is that very high on your list in terms of importance? Do you want somebody who's more in line with how your investment philosophies work? Those are all things that you kind of want to prioritize, write down, and come into your first meeting with, to make sure that you're talking with the right person and really not wasting your time. I mean, we're all busy, we all don't want to waste our time. I think that being upfront with what you want and how you want to see things play out is always important. And I think that making a list of your your deal breakers and your non-negotiables is a very big thing to kind of start off with when you go into trying to find the right successor. Does the personality of the buyer match up well with your clients? Clearly these are people you've been working with for 20, 30, sometimes 40 years now. I mean, they probably feel like friends of yours at this point, family. You want to make sure that the personality of the person that is buying your book of business is going to mesh well with these people, as obviously you care for them. Do the investment portfolios match up with your investments? That's going to be very important when you're talking about portability. And going into the next point, how portable are the clients? You want to make sure that if you're moving broker dealers or firms, you want to make sure that the products can line up and you're not left leaving clients on the table if you're going to make a potential move. So you want to make sure that the portability of the clients is good. That will help the retention stay up. Help you guys get paid out as much as you possibly can on the book as well, because most of these agreements will have built-in retention clauses of 90% in them with a 12-month look back. So you're going to want to make sure that the majority of the book moves over, so you could get paid out, the full value of your book. And then weighing the pros and cons of each potential buyer. You may have several that end up being a pretty good fit for yourself, and it may come down to things like location, how close they are to you. It may come down to capacity, how somebody may have a little bit more capacity or less capacity than the other. So you just want to make sure that you're looking at all angles and figure out what may be the best, fit for you when you go into that process.
Yeah, and that's kind of just to touch on that before I go into the structuring. I mean, it's funny because a lot of people will say we're sort of like the Match.com of financial advisors, right? And I think there's something to be said about that because it really is that's probably the most important part is if you're not going to be a fit, whether it's personality wise, there's no point of even continuing the discussion, which is why we work a little bit differently than some of the other firms that you might have heard of out there, where we're not really a listing service. So we could explain a little bit further down the road how we work with advisors, but we're a little more selective, and we try to find the right fit first, make the introduction, build a rapport, and then work on different numbers and structuring, because I feel like if you're not going to be a good fit, or if there are certain items that you're reluctant about with the potential advisor, it's just you're not going to get what we would call kind of the warm and fuzzy there as you go along. So it's immediately going to be maybe turn into a deal breaker. So I think just really the dating phase is so important. And I think you have to date somebody before you get married, and like in any situation. And it really rings true here with advisors. So I think that's really important. But then going off to structuring the sale, which is another one that people will come to us. A lot of people don't really know how a typical sale is structured. And you could see a few of these different avenues and things that we'll talk about here up on this slide. But let's talk starting with upfront money. I think everybody's going to have a different sort of upfront number that they have in mind, whether you're looking to buy a lake house and go and have a vacation house and you want more upfront money, or maybe you want less upfront money and you want more of an annuity over the next 5 years, and more of a payout over the next 5 years than you do upfront. Typical upfront payments are usually between, I know it's kind of vague, but between 10 and 50. I think more often we see in that 20 to 30 range upfront. I think we don't see a lot of 100% upfront cash deals. It's not the best way to do one of these deals. And if you do, it's the valuation's going to be, you're going to get significantly lower for it, and usually it poses some red flags for the buyer, because I think that's, and we'll talk more about that as far as the retention, like Scott had mentioned, where that comes into play. And then moving off to seller financing, that's one of the, we do see that a lot. I think it's a matter of, hey, you get the upfront payment, and then instead of going through a bank, the seller can say, I'll hold the note for the next 3 to 5 years, or 3 to 6 years, and charge an interest of 5 to 10%, whatever that might be, and collect from them on a monthly or quarterly basis from the buyer for a number of years. And that's a popular way to do it. I think it does pose some problems with seller financing, but you get a promissory note, you set that up, and now you're getting paid from the buyer. And I think the main difference between doing it that way and bank financing is that when you're doing seller financing, you have to really trust the buyer. And I haven't seen any of these sort of seller financing deals go south yet. Hopefully, hopefully I don't. But what would happen? Does anybody know what happens if the buyer all of a sudden can't pay the seller note? Okay. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things. Nobody really wins in those cases. So you want to try to avoid that. I think if you can, where you want to make sure that the buyer is financially feasible, because basically you have to get attorneys involved, or you have to end up as a seller. One of the worst things you would want to do is have to take the practice back. Now you're going to your clients basically saying, hey, this was the guy that, I trusted, that would take over your account. And now, because he wasn't able to pay, or, wasn't able to run the business the right way, now I have to take this business back because he wasn't able to make the payment. So again, I've never seen that. It is rare, but, in that case, obviously the attorney is the winner in that situation. So just be mindful of that. And then bank financing, we work with a few different lenders in the space. Live Oak, Skyview. We've done presentations alongside with PPC, some really good firms that specialize in doing these types of transactions. And I think it's good for the buyer a lot, because they can spread out they can amortize these over maybe a 10-year period. So from a cash flow standpoint for the buyer, it's a little bit better than doing seller financing, where you're only financing it over a 3 to 6 year period. So it gives the buyer a little bit more flexibility, but also from a seller standpoint, you know that hey, after 12 months, or it's usually after 12 months, there'll be a retention in there. So give you an example. So let's say your practice is worth $1 million and the buyer's using bank financing, and you say, okay, I want 20% up front. So the buyer takes the loan out for $1 million, right? And the bank disperses the 200,000 or the 20%, and then the remaining 80% is held in like an interest bearing escrow account for the next 6 months, 12 months. Some of them do 24, but a lot, I would say majority is 12 months. And then what happens is, as long as you bring over X amount of assets, whether it's whatever that negotiated number is, 80, 90%, then the bank will pay you out in full for 12 months. And there's ways to help that with capital gains, to try to minimize the tax implications. But that's one way of doing it, and I think becoming more and more popular. And then lastly, just percentage of revenue. I think that's another way of doing it. You could say, hey, we'll pay you X% of revenue over the next X amount of years. It could be a increasing or a decreasing percentage, depending on the overall purchase price. And that we see that a lot more in an earnout type scenario when it comes to the percentage of revenue. But those are the four main things that we will see and have to help with on structuring the sale. And yeah, I mean, I think that gives you kind of a good overview there.
On to business valuation. Having all your necessary documents ready is always a good, step for getting prepared to get a business valuation done. P&L statements, really AUM and GDC reports, tax returns, probably later on, to be honest with you, and something like that. To give you a valuation, if you give me your last 12 months revenue numbers and some different age demographics of your book, should be able to spit out a number pretty quickly. The P&Ls and tax returns and stuff, that's going to be more towards when you really start solidifying a deal and you want to dig deeper into the book. But valuation we can get for you if that's something you guys need. Evaluating your business and determining a fair price for it. Again, you're going to want to consider the tax implications on a potential sale, capital gains versus ordinary income. It's a lot easier to have a deal with capital gains through the bank financing process because you're getting paid out in large lumps. If you're getting paid out monthly or quarterly or something like that, your CPA may have to get a little creative as to keeping that away from the ordinary income, which really will save you about 10% in tax. And one thing you could think about too is if you do decide to go with holding the note yourself, some of the interest that you're going to be holding on that note will help offset some of those tax implications as well too. So that's always a positive as well too. Seeking professional advice to ensure a smooth, financial transition. Again, I would if you're getting close to wanting to sell your book, I highly recommend getting evaluation done beforehand, potentially by a couple different, firms or your own BD. Some of them will do that for you as well too, but I think that most of them, will be within percentage points of one another. So shouldn't be a big disparity on that, but very important to know, what your business is worth going into it, just for your sake and for the buyer's sake as well. Items that affect the valuation, recurring revenue, fee base is king, basically. Right now, you're seeing multiples on recurring revenue for advisory or managed money, anywhere between 2.75 times to 3.25 times revenue. Trails, we're seeing still about 2 times revenue And then transactional revenue, anywhere between 0 and 1 times is kind of what you're looking at, depending on what the product is. If there's if there's products stuck in surrender for the next 5 to 7 years, you may not see any value on something like that. And there's a little small spot to I would say get some goodwill out of it too. If there's a small percentage of your book that's transactional, maybe you get another quarter basis point, on the revenue, as goodwill too. So you could always look into something like that. Client age demographics, is a big, I would say, affecting multiple basically. And if the book is very old and there's a lot of people over the age of 80, you may see that multiple come down a little bit. And again, if they're under the age of 70, you may see that go up a bit. Location, not really too big of a deterrent when it comes to the multiples, but age very much is. How many households is another one. If you have 30 million with 1,000 households versus 30 million with 30 households, your book is going to be worth more, the less, or I would say the higher worth the client is or the household is. How transferable is your client base and their assets to a new firm? Touched on that briefly a few slides back. Portability is big. You want to make sure that whoever you're going over to is able to take on the assets and products that you have at your firm currently now. So that's something you want to make sure you look into before, potentially making a move over to a different BD, for sure.
Yeah, and I think to with regards to valuation as well. So we're going to be sending everybody a practice profile as well as a replay copy of this for those who didn't have a chance to sit in on this. But the practice profile really is a simple two-pager that allows us. It's kind of a high level. It's not a certified valuation or anything like that. But I know when we talk to a lot of advisors, they want to get an idea of, hey, what's my practice worth? What are some of the different ways that I can structure some options? Sometimes we do a lot of consulting, whether if we're not matching buyers and sellers, we'll do consulting as well, where somebody will have a buyer already lined up and we help them kind of talk and walk through valuation, deal structuring, all of that as well. So we'll be sending a practice profile out for those folks who just are kind of interested in learning a little bit a range. And like Scott said, there's really not a lot of deviation amongst these valuations. You could pay $2,000 for a 50-page report, and I could probably tell you we'll come pretty close with those numbers. So it's just a matter of how high or low the multiples are, and then one thing to add too is that the higher the producing businesses, those tend to get valued off a multiple of EBITDA. So cash flow is important on some of those larger practices versus just a multiple of revenue. But going to talking a little bit about the succession timeline, and I know we're kind of going through it a little bit quickly. So certainly feel free to raise your hand, and if anybody has any questions on what we've covered so far, I know we've kind of gone through it a little quickly, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I know everybody's busy, and it's well, here on the East Coast, the lunch hour for many of you. So but feel free to stop me at any point. I don't want to feel like I breeze through it too quick. Yeah, we have somebody. Yep.
Marvin, go ahead. Looks like you may be on mute, Marvin.
Yeah, Marvin, you may have to take yourself off mute there. Let's see.
Okay. I'm going to put you down. If you have a question and you want to type it in, go right ahead and we'll stop and answer.
Yeah, we could just do it on the chat. If I think you might have muted yourself here. Let me see if we could unmute. No, okay. Anyway, sorry, Marvin. We'll get to you. We'll get to you here shortly. So just kind of talking a little bit about the succession timeline and the implementation of it. You want to establish a clear timeline for the succession plan. Are you looking to sell and leave or stay around for 1 to 5 years or more? I think that's the first thing that most advisors will, and it's not always a cut dry, a black and white date, right? I think everybody always says, well, I'm 5 years out, and then that 5 years could either turn into two or it could turn into 10. So a lot of times there's really no black and white date, but just knowing most people have an idea whether or not we hear it all the time. Oh, I'm going to die at my desk. And I think, there's a lot to be said about that. I think it's certainly not the best way to go about it, especially if you're kind of leaving your clients high and dry, and you want to maintain and preserve the value of your business. So I think having a sort of a clear cut idea of how long you want to stay around is important because it does change the structure of the deal. If you only want to stay around for a year or two, you can. I mean, that's enough time to get a transition done, but that's going to be structured differently than somebody who wants to stick around for 5 years or more. So I always tell people that when they come to me and they're like, "Oh, I'm 5 years out," right? So maybe these conversations are slightly too preliminary, or maybe it's a little too early to have these. And I always say that there's a lot of things you have to consider with that too. Even if you're 5 years out, if you came to me and said I want to sell my business today, it could take it's going to take some time to identify the right successor. It's also going to take some time to once you do identify the right person, to really dot all the, I's and cross all the T's, so to speak, on the structuring of the deal. Those things take some time. If there's bank financing involved, that takes even longer. And then, really, you have to stick around and help with the transition for usually a minimum of 12 to 18 months. So even if you wanted to sell and be out under a year, could you do it? Yeah, absolutely. I see it happen all the time. It's certainly it just has to be a quick transition. So I know a lot of buyers even prefer a longer time frame, like a 2 to 3 year time frame, versus somebody who's, yeah, if you're looking to get out immediately, makes it a little more challenging. I think, Marvin, we got your question. Let's see. I
How do you
can't.
value annuities, both with recurring trails and those that do not have trails?
All right. So, yeah, I mean, that's a good question, Marvin. Thanks. I appreciate it. Annuities, on the trails, we're seeing on average about a 2x multiple on those trails. So I think that's anything that's going to be recurring, we're seeing at least a 2x multiple in many cases. That's not always the case, but usually between 2 and 2.25 multiple on annuity trails. Now, the upfront annuity commission, that's going to be more towards the commission side. So that's going to be more of a 1x multiple. Now, the one thing I will say, it could, if it's like a fixed index annuity, like for instance, if all of those contracts were just written and they don't expire for another 10, 15 years, those could be potentially worth zero to somebody. And I think, yeah, I always say this, a practice is worth what somebody's willing to pay for it. But on the annuity side, usually it's better to take the trails, right, than take the upfront commission, because that's more valuable to a potential buyer. And I think that's what we're seeing on the annuity side. Still valuable, still plenty of buyers out there that want those. Just yeah, they're not as valuable as that fee-based advisory wrap account that everybody's out there looking for now. So that's kind of gives you an idea of some of the annuities. And we've seen there's a lot of books, especially now that we're seeing there's a lot of mixed books. So not everybody always wants to be fee based because it's the most valuable, but there are a lot of advisors who, if a client, if it's the best for the client and they need to put them into an annuity product, then you want to be able to do that. So yeah, great question, Marvin. Thank you. And just kind of continuing, just almost I'll wrap up that first part, is really the point I was making, is that you want to, we have another question. Sorry, Marvin. long-term care with recurring that's probably going to be again, it's probably you're looking at 2x, I think anything, and you have to, it has to be a buyer that wants to have that into their book too. So what you want to try to avoid is somebody who is, let's say, a fee-based advisor, and all they want is your fee-based or the advisory portion, and they may look at that and say the long-term care is worth nothing to me.
And that might not be the buyer for you either.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. And that goes back to finding the right buyer. But I think, if somebody is willing to bring it, wants that and does that, or is,
yeah,
wants
he's
that.
talking about long-term care, by the way.
Yeah, yeah, long term. I think I mentioned that. I thought I mentioned that. But yeah, I think that's a 2x. I think anything recurring again, it's like life insurance. Life insurance 2x. 12B1 fees 2x. 2 to 2.25. I think anything like that is going to run in that ballpark.
Anything getting a trail.
Yeah. And then, moving on. So just to finish kind of up on that last one, and thanks, Marvin. But yeah, it's just knowing your timeline. And I think these things take some time. So if you think it's too premature to start having these conversations, I always think that it's never too premature, because you want to have some conversations and find the right fit, and these things all take time. So then moving on, if you're looking to grow and structure an earnout. So I talked a little bit about this earlier in the presentation, but there are people who want to stick around for 5 years. Like I mentioned, take a lot of the day to day off their plate and feel like they can do a better job growing and structuring an earnout. That's for somebody who wants to stick around, wants to be active in the business. You're not going to do an earnout if you just want to, sell the book and manage, talk to your clients every once in a while and just ride off into the sunset. You're not going to do an earnout. That's more for folks who want to grow the business and feel like they can grow the business with an earnout structure, and basically you're still valuing the business. So you're saying, hey, that same business I mentioned before, it's $1 million. You might get 200 up front, and then the remainder is paid out on a revenue that's more of like a revenue share. And then also, as you bring on more and more assets, you get compensated for those assets, but it also increases the overall valuation of the book too. So that's a way. I think it's a popular way for folks who really want to stick around for a while. And then, maybe all you need is a contingency. If you want to stick around for more than 10 years, but you want to know that, hey, we all talk about getting hit by the bus at some point, and you want to make sure that when that does happen, that you're able to preserve the value of your business. So typically you're going to set a contingency only plan up with somebody who's internally in your firm, right?
Death and disability.
Yeah.
Well, good. We actually had we were working with an advisor out in California. He was about 72 years old. He, we had him in touch with a buyer. They were getting very close to completing a deal. He ended up passing away with his feet up on his desk. And when his family contacted us after that, they ultimately had to go back to the BD, and they ended up getting like half of the value of what the book was worth at that point, because there was nobody there to help pass that thing along. So if you, it's highly recommended that you at least put something in place for yourself, a death and disability agreement with somebody. It doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be with who you eventually plan on selling to if you haven't identified that person yet. But it's very important to get something in place for yourself, so that if something, God forbid, does happen, you are protected, and the value of your book is going to be way more protected than it would be if you didn't have anything set up, and if you have your clients and accounts getting scattered all across a BD. So I think it's very important for you guys to set something up, whether it's an actual sale, a purchase agreement, or just a death and disability or contingency only plan.
Yep.
I think it's very, very important for you guys to have something set up.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, and I know it changes with the DOL and certain broker dealers mandating succession plans and things of that nature. So the landscape of everything is always changing with mandating succession plans, but it really is. For the number one thing we hear from advisors or my clients are my most important thing. So obviously, if that's the case, you need to have something set up because not just like Scott said in the event where something happens and you got a fire sale event, but also you want to make sure that they're going to the right person. This the type of person that you've the service that you've given them for the last 20, 30 years. So I think that's where I kind of laugh a little bit when we talk to advisors and they're like, well, I'm 85 years old and I'm healthy, and it's like, well, that's great and good for you. I would love to be able to. I'm only 42 and I would love to be 85 and healthy, but at some point, father time comes knocking. So I think we need to have that plan in place, and it's important. And then really just ensuring that it's all well structured. I think that the more the better if it's implemented correctly and it's structured. I think all of these just really tend to fall. I mean, I've never really seen too many of the deals that we have done or even other firms have done that really go south. I mean, there's a few stories. I'm sure anybody you talk to will tell you about a few horror stories where something didn't go as planned. But I think if you start early, you give yourself time, and you do it, and you don't rush it, then you pretty much ensure a well structured plan. And we're gonna go pretty much wrap it up. We'll go into questions here, and it looks like we got one.
Yeah, it says, is the multiple typically calculated on the gross fee, which might include platform fees, et cetera, that get paid to the custodian? So yeah, for the most part, multiples are going to be based on your gross revenue. GDC, if you're with a broker dealer, if you're independent RIA only, you're going to look at the gross receipts or gross, revenue. Once you cross over the barrier of, I would say about 2 million in revenue, you're probably going to start looking at EBITDA or cash flow of the business. So you'll really start looking into the expenses of that business and figuring out what the profit is on that business. And then you're typically seeing multiples of EBITDA range anywhere from what, 6 to 10?
Yeah.
6 to 10 times multiples in that range.
Yep.
But again, you're going to be looking at EBITDA in very specific cases. If it's under 2 million, where there are certain circumstances that, the expenses are very high and you have to look into that a little deeper. But for the most part, once you cross over that 2 million barrier in terms of revenue, that's when you'll start really looking at multiples of EBITDA as opposed to multiples of gross revenue.
And sometimes it matches up, honestly. I've seen a 6x EBITDA multiple equal a 2.5 times gross revenue. And to go back to that question really quick, the reason why they do that and value it off the top end versus the net amount is because the buyer might have a totally different payout than you. So if you're getting a 75% payout and you sell your business and that buyer has a 90% payout, that's why they go off the top end revenue number. So yeah, thanks. Good question. And
On
then
to the next slide here, just a little bit about us. We're a consulting firm that specializes in, business acquisition and succession planning services for you guys, financial advisors across the country. We're kind of, like Joe said, a matchmaker. Uh, we basically have anywhere between 40 and 50 buyers that we work with across the country that we have vetted out financially, that we have vetted to make sure that their U4s are clean. That most of, I would say 95% of the buyers we have in this program have already successfully done an acquisition or multiple acquisitions before. And we also make sure to look into the capacity. Are they able to take on additional assets and clients and advisors? So that's something that we do our due diligence on. We have, like I said, anywhere between 40 and 50 buyers, sometimes multiple buyers in different territories. And we don't charge for any of our services on your end. The buyer is the one who foots the bill. If there's any deal done, they're the ones who pay our commissions. So we help in terms of putting a valuation on your book. And like Joe mentioned, we'll be sending out a practice profile to all of you that signed up for this webinar, where if you fill it out for me, we can give you a actual valuation of your book and tell you what we think it's worth. And then we also help structure the deal. We help negotiate the price with you. Anything that's needed in the deal, we're very hands-on. And we do about 30 to 35 deals a year. We've been doing this for over a decade, so we have a lot of experience with this. We've seen a lot of different cases. So if any of you would like to pick our brain about different circumstances, issues, anything like that, feel free. We'll be reaching out early next week to all of you anyway, just to see if you have any questions or anything like that. But feel free to reach out to us, schedule some time. We're happy to go over that. If you'd like us to introduce you to one of our buyers, we could certainly give you more information about the potential buyer that we have in your area, or within your BD if location is not something that you value as much as that. Sometimes, especially with when COVID hit, a lot of people are seeing that, meetings being done over Zoom, is easy enough where a location is not as much of a factor anymore. So again, if you need us in any capacity, I'm going to flip up the next screen here. Here's our phone number, both of our emails. Feel free to reach out to us in any capacity, and we're happy to help out. And if anybody has any further questions here, feel free to fire away. And if not, I appreciate everybody hopping on here, and yeah, we're looking forward to speaking with you guys soon.
Yep. Okay. Looks like we have a pretty quiet group today, so we won't take any more of your time here, and hope everybody has a great rest of the day, and look forward to speaking hopefully with as many of you as possible, and see if we can help. Thanks.
Thank you.